The small house was quiet, except for the faint creak of wooden beams settling into the cool of evening. A pot of tea steamed on the low table, its scent mingling with the faint sweetness of the dried flowers hanging by the window. The last light of day slipped through the thin lace curtain, painting the room in gold and shadow. On the woven mat, the grandmother sat cross-legged, her back slightly bent, her hands resting on her lap. They were wrinkled hands, soft, yet marked by the grooves of long years. They had kneaded dough in hungry winters, carried firewood through snow, held the fragile weight of infants and the heavy silence of loss. Beside her, the child, no more than 8, leaned close, chin resting on one small hand. The other hand, delicate and warm, reached out to clasp the grandmother's fingers. Their sizes were so different that the contrast itself was like a story, time measured in the space between 2 generations. "Grandma," the child whispered, eyes wide. "Why do your hands look like the bark of the old tree outside?" The old woman chuckled softly, though her eyes glistened with something deeper. "Because, my dear," she said, her voice carrying both pain and tenderness, "they have held on to many seasons, just as that tree has." The child tilted their head. "Will you tell me about them, the seasons you held?" For a long moment, the grandmother gazed at the fading light, as if the walls themselves held echoes of the past. Her eyes, though tired, began to shine with memories stirring awake. "Yes," she whispered, "I will tell you, but it may not always be easy to hear." "I don't mind," the child said quickly, squeezing her hand. "I want to know everything." The grandmother smiled faintly, her face a map of lines, carved by years of both sorrow and love. She drew in a breath that seemed to pull the air from far behind her, from another world entirely. "Then listen closely," she said, and the house grew still, as if time itself leaned in to hear. The grandmother's gaze softened as the evening air pressed gently against the thin walls. She closed her eyes for a moment, her hands still wrapped in the child's. "I was smaller than you," she began, her voice almost breaking into a laugh. "My hair was long, always falling into my eyes, and my feet were almost always bare. We didn't have shoes for every child, not in those days." The child blinked, picturing it. No shoes, not even for winter. A faint smile crept across the grandmother's face, though her eyes remained far away. "In winter, we would wrap cloth around our feet, or sometimes we just ran quickly so the cold wouldn't catch us too hard. We didn't know any better. To us, it was normal." As she spoke, the dim room seemed to shift, the child's mind filled with images. A wide dirt yard where children laughed, chasing each other under a pale sky. A girl, the grandmother, only 10 years old, raced with her brothers, her small feet coated in dust. Their shirts were patched, their bellies not always full, but their laughter rang out like bells. The grandmother's voice trembled, then steadied. "We were poor, yes, but there was always noise in the house. Always Liedchen my mother sang while she worked, even if her voice was tired. My father would bring home scraps of wood and carve little toys for us. He was a man who could make something out of nothing." The child leaned closer, eyes round. "What kind of toys?" "Little horses, birds. Once he carved me a tiny flute," the grandmother said, her lips curling in nostalgia. I blew on it until my cheeks hurt. The sound was sharp and not very pretty, but it made me feel like I had a song of my own. Her voice fell quiet for a moment. The flickering light of the lamp caught her wrinkles, deepening the lines that time had etched. "But hunger," she whispered. Hunger was always there. I remember lying in bed with my brothers, our stomachs aching, our eyes wide open in the dark. My mother would hush us with stories, just as I hush you now. She told us, if you listen closely, you'll hear the stars singing. And we believed her. We would close our eyes, pretending the pinpricks of light above were humming lullabies just for us. The child squeezed her hand. "Did you really hear them?" The grandmother's eyes grew moist, her smile soft and sad. "Yes, my dear. When you're a child, you hear everything, even things grown people can no longer hear. The stars sang to us, and that singing was stronger than the ache in our bellies." She paused, tilting her head as though she could still hear it. The room was quiet, the present and pot folding gently into each other. But those days did not last long. She finally said, her voice lowering, "Childhood is like morning light, bright but quick to fade. Shadows were waiting for us, and they came sooner than we ever thought." The child's fingers tightened on hers, sensing the weight of what was to come. "Grandma?" the child whispered. "What happened?" The grandmother sighed, her breath carrying both memory and sorrow. "The first loss," she murmured. "The day I learned the world can take from you, even when you've given it nothing but innocence." Her eyes glistened as she leaned back, preparing to open a door in her memory that had long stayed closed. The lamp flickered gently, shadows trembling along the wooden walls. The grandmother's hand grew heavier in the child's, as if her bones remembered the weight of that long-ago day. She took in a slow breath, her eyes not on the present, but on a past that pressed against her chest even now. "I was 9, she began quietly. Still a child, but old enough to notice when silence replaced laughter in the house. The child tilted their head. "Silence?" The grandmother nodded. My mother's voice grew weaker. The songs she sang at night, the ones that drowned our hunger, grew shorter. Some nights she didn't sing at all. She would sit by the fire, staring at the flames, her hands trembling. I didn't understand then. I only thought, perhaps she was tired from work. The ruse seemed to blur as the flashback unfurled. The child could almost see it. A young girl crouched by the hearth, watching her mother's face, pale and lined far beyond her years. A thin cough rattled from her chest, and her eyes, once so bright, grew dimmer each evening. "One morning," the grandmother whispered, "I woke, and the house was too still. My father sat with his head in his hands. My brothers clung to him, but I stood frozen. My mother lay on her mat, her breath barely there. Her hand was cold when I touched it. Her voice faltered, but she pressed on, as if the story itself demanded to be spoken. She was gone before the sun rose. The silence in the room deepened. The child's small fingers clutched hers tightly, as if to anchor her to the present. The grandmother's eyes glistened in the dim light. When you lose a mother as a child, the world changes shape. Food tastes different. Laughter feels hollow. Even the stars, the ones that once sang us to sleep, fell quiet. She swallowed, her voice breaking into the smallest tremor. I remember pressing my face into her blanket, breathing in her scent, afraid it would disappear. And I remember my father's eyes. He was a strong man, but that day I saw them break. The child leaned closer, resting their head gently against her arm. "Grandma, did you cry?" The old woman let out a shaky breath. "I didn't. Not at first. I thought if I didn't cry, maybe she would come back. Children believe such things. I held it in for days, and then, one night, I woke to see my father sitting alone, tears streaming down his face. And that was when I finally let myself cry too. She wiped at her cheek with her free hand, though no tears had yet fallen. That was the day I learned loss, a lesson no child should ever have to learn. The child's eyes shimmered. "But you still had your father and your brothers?" "Yes," the grandmother whispered, a fragile smile tugging at her lips. "We had each other, and that is what saved us, even when the world began to take more." She fell quiet, gazing at the darkened window where the evening light had faded into night. The stars glimmered faintly above, though dim behind the clouds. "After my mother left," she murmured, "I was no longer only a child. I became something else, a helper, a little mother to my brothers, a pair of hands for my boy. Childhood ended for me that winter." Her wrinkled hand tightened gently around the child's small one. "Remember this, my dear. When you lose something precious, you will want to fall apart. But sometimes, the only choice is to stand, even with broken knees." The child looked up at her, eyes wide and shining. "That's very hard." The grandmother smiled faintly, her tired eyes glimmering. "Yes, it is very hard. But that is how we keep living." The room grew still again, the silence heavy but not empty. It was filled with memory, with grief that lingered but also shaped her strength. The night outside pressed softly against the windows. A cricket's thin song rose from the grass beyond, carrying through the still air. The child, curled now against the grandmother's side, listened with steady breath. The grandmother's voice, though low, had grown steadier, as if telling the story gave her both pain and strength. "After my mother passed," she said, "the world asked me to grow up quickly. My father could not carry everything alone. The fields still needed tending. My brothers still needed feeding. And so I learned to work." The child lifted their head. "What kind of work?" Her tired eyes softened. "Every soir, fetching water from the well at dawn, gathering firewood with hands too small for the axe, kneading dough with arms that ached. And when my father went out to labor, I kept the little ones quiet, fed, and safe." The child frowned, puzzled. "But you were only 9. A faint smile crept across her lips. "Yes, 9 years old, and already carrying more than I could. But there was no one else." The room seemed to shimmer with memory. In the child's imagination, the young girl appeared again, barefoot, hair tangled, carrying a wooden bucket from the well. Her arms shook, the water sloshed, but she gritted her teeth and pressed forward. Later, she sat on the dirt floor, spooning thin broth into her younger brother's mouth while rocking the baby on her knee. There was no time for games anymore, the grandmother continued. I watched other children chase each other in the fields, their laughter drifting toward me while I scrubbed clothes by the stream. Sometimes I wanted to run with them, to forget everything. But then I'd see my brothers waiting, hungry, and I could not turn away. The child whispered, "That's not fair." The grandmother's smile was gentle but sad. Life is not always fair, little one, but it teaches us what we are capable of. I discovered strength I didn't know I had. Her voice slowed, turning almost reflective. My hands hardened before they should have. Blisters became calluses. My back ached like an old woman's while I was still a girl. Yet there was pride in it too. I could light a fire faster than any boy in the village. I could carry a sack of the grain taller than myself. I became unbreakable. At least, that is what I told myself. The child's eyes shone with admiration. You were like a hero. The grandmother chuckled softly, shaking her head. No, not a hero, just a girl with no choice. Heroes choose their battles. I only did what I had to do. Her gaze fell to her hands, resting in the lamplight. The skin was thin now, veins raised, knuckles swollen with age. She turned them slowly, as though still seeing the calluses that once marked her youth. I missed many things, she whispered. School, for one. I could only attend a little. Books were treasures I barely touched. While others learned letters and numbers, I learned how to keep a fire from dying, how to hush a crying baby, how to make soup from almost nothing. My childhood was traded for survival. The child leaned in, their small face troubled. Did you ever feel angry? The grandmother thought for a long moment. Finally, she said, yes. At night, when the house was quiet, I would lie awake and ask the dark, why me? Why must I carry so much? But morning always came, and with morning there was work. Anger cannot cook a meal, it cannot fetch water. So I folded my anger away, like an old shawl, and carried on. She exhaled deeply, her eyes glistening with both pride and sorrow. That is when I learned. Strength is not about being fearless. It is about doing what must be done, even when you are afraid, even when you are tired. The child nestled closer, whispering, I think you were very brave, Grandma. The old Wapiyasid, Oman's lips curved in a faint, weary smile. Perhaps, or perhaps I was only stubborn. But that stubbornness carried me through many storms yet to come. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the Om